Beyond the Fence Line, a podcast brought to you by the Texas Agricultural Land Trust. Created by landowners for landowners, we're proud to play a role in conserving the Texas legacy of wide open spaces.
Hi, I'm Sandra Velarde, and I lead our fundraising efforts here at TALT. Gifts that are given to TALT stay right here in Texas, protecting open space that will be here for generations to come. Giving to TALT means investing in communities, clean water, and clean air that benefit us all. Please consider a small recurring donation today and be part of that movement that is keeping Texas big, wide, and open. Visit our website to learn more at www.txaglandtrust.org/support.
Well, welcome to Beyond the Fence Line, episode 15. On this episode, we're going to explore strategies for revenue generations on our working lands. I got two dear friends of mine and true thought leaders in the industry, Mr. Terry Anderson with Conservation Equity Partners, and then also Greg Simons with Wildlife Systems. Greg, Terry, appreciate you guys joining us.
Yeah, happy to participate.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. I think let's really kind of open this up with a brief overview of each of your companies. Greg, you kind of give us a little bit of, tell us a little bit about Wildlife Systems.
Sure, you bet. Appreciate the opportunity to do so. Wildlife Systems is a company I started in 1987, shortly after I graduated with a wildlife and fishery sciences degree from Texas A&M. Had an opportunity to work on some internships in the hunting business when I was in college, including with an individual who was just getting started with a commercial hunting business. So it gave me a chance to kind of see what it was like firsthand to try to fledge a business, and put me in a position to where I was able to sketch out a business plan my senior year and put together some funding dollars from a couple of different individuals to get things started. And basically our focus today is very similar to what it's been, since the early years, and that's principally developing commercial hunting programs on different private lands, principally here in Texas, but over the years we've done some work in several other states, several foreign countries. We also provide some technical guidance, technical assistance to different landowners, bank trust groups, and others on different types of wildlife management needs. And over the years, the primary thing that's changed is just our footprint, how things have grown, and the number of programs that we're involved with. But for the most part, the general concept of the business still remains very similar to what it did in the early years.
Hey, Greg, on that, maybe a little bit more on that. Is your clientele the same, or has it changed over the years?
There's been some flow early on, just due to lack of being able to develop our markets around the country. We were heavily dependent on our Texas market because it was the most convenient one for us to access, being based out of Texas. And then from really about 1999 until about 2005, roughly, Pennsylvania was our biggest state. There was a period of several years where not only was it our biggest state for clients, it was our biggest state by a pretty large margin. There really wasn't a close second. And but the Southeast, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, the Carolinas, all those areas over the years have been strong areas for us. Back when the real estate markets kind of cratered around 2004, 2005, 2006 in some areas, including Florida, things changed somewhat. In 2009, it seemed like we did not have a distinct strong market area. The whole country was kind of struggling. And then since 2010 forward, the Eagleford kicked in 2010. In our Texas markets really grew considerably over a period of several years. But today it's pretty diverse. We've got very good balance between non-resident hunters as well as Texans that are hunting with us.
Great, thanks. It's just interesting to me, the dynamics of how the clientele, as well as kind of what the landscape of our landowners look like now. It's kind of changed over the years as well, and how they kind of mirror each other a little bit as well. Terry, I know you're good friends with Greg and a partner with Greg. Bless Greg's heart, having to put up with you. And why don't you tell us a little bit about your kind of latest venture on Conservation Equity Partners?
Yeah, happy to, and thank you, Chad. It's in some ways it is on the opposite end of the spectrum from wildlife systems, and I guess I've known Greg for many years, since going back about to the time of our college days, but after that our paths took very different directions, and I moved into the private consulting sector, and I started out at a much larger college than Greg, who went to A&M. I started off behind the pine curtain at Stephen F. Austin. So Greg's been trying to catch up for years and getting really close. So at any rate, I spent 28 years in the private consulting space, largely working on mitigation projects, environmental offsets, and just some environmental consulting. But I kind of took an early retirement in 2017, did a few other things that I was kind of passionate about, and then started Conservation Equity Partners with Greg, and we just kind of merged our worlds together. Conservation Equity Partners is really an enterprise where we're trying to take advantage of some of the current changes going on. And I think a good way to describe it is that we're trying to use Conservation Equity Partners as an enterprise that merges a lot of those traditional natural resource management practices with real estate investment, with ecosystem services and the evolution of that industry, and put it all together in one kind of a unique package. So we do some consulting in Conservation Equity Partners, but not a lot. We spend more time looking for private landowners that have interesting projects they're trying to accomplish, some lands that we can acquire to develop some of these projects on. So in some cases, we're buying land to develop our own projects. In others, we're truly partnering, hence the name, with private landowners that have no desire to sell their land, but either may lack the capital or the technical expertise to move forward. And we try to put it together in a logical fashion that makes financial sense and create some positive ecological outcome along the way.
That's great. I mean, to me, it's amazing and how you've merged, you and Greg's businesses together, and it's important, right? And I think one of the key parts that really stands out to me is that both of you understand, and it's kind of TALT's philosophy as well, is that we're in the relationship business, and both of you take that principle to another level, and people mean so much to both of you, and then it's about the relationships of the people, and it's about the relationships of the people to the land. And I think another component is that both of your ventures are really hinged around this idea of adding value to those working lands operations, right? It's about finding these different revenue streams, and it's easy to think about the product that comes from the working lands, but we often lose the other values found on these operations. So I'd like for us to talk a little bit about that, and maybe Terry, kind of maybe hear from your thoughts of those other values. It's what I call beyond the fence line, right? Those ecosystem services that not only help the land and the landowner, but flow across that fence line back down to the consumers.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to do that. And again, we are at when it comes to ecosystem services and those components, I mean, I think we're truly at a generational moment right now where some things are happening that certainly haven't happened in a long, long time. There are a lot of elements coming together to create opportunity, I believe. And, a few of them of the ecosystem services have been fairly well quantified and structured for a while. The mitigation banking in terms of offsetting impacts to streams or wetlands, some of the species habitat projects are offsetting impacts to threatened endangered species. Those markets they seem new to a lot of people, but really they've been around and evolving since the late 70s into the 80s, and they started to get structure in the 90s. And unfortunately, those are largely niche-oriented opportunities, and it's not one size fits all. And a lot of things have to come together to make a mitigation bank for wetlands or a bank for species, both from the right form of habitat in the right market with the right type of impact. So that's certainly not a broad-based market that just any landowner can jump into. It's very niche-oriented.
Yeah.
But now we're on the cusp of a lot of these new markets, and carbon sequestration is back. And I don't know if this is, depending on how you count it, this is the 5th, 6th, or the 7th time it's kind of risen up in America since the late 90s. But I think it's got a little staying power this time, and with a lot of other things that are happening around the world, I think we're going to see some carbon markets expand and grow in a way that the average producer in the rangeland world or in the timber world can generate some dollars. Some of the water markets around the country are starting to get more structure to those. People have talked about water around San Antonio for a long time, on the Edwards Aquifer, but suddenly water is taking on some new meaning in Texas. And then again, that's old hat to some people out west, California. There's been a lot of energy around water for years, but there's just an array of these markets that have bubbled up, and they start as a series of deals. They're really not a market. They're just a series of deals. And then it becomes kind of an early stage market where it's starting to get some structure to it. And then as it grows from there, they start to get more structure. They start to stabilize and get a little more repeatable. So we're across the realm of ecosystem services, particularly in Texas and these surrounding states. We're at that point where we've got some pretty mature ecological markets, but then what's really exciting is, again, a lot of these new deals that are going to grow and evolve over the next year or so.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. I mean, I think too, it's beyond the carbon, right? I mean, you've heard me say this, that I think it's, the carbon is just one little piece, right? It's about stacking all these other, I think, potential markets of biodiversity and water and et cetera. And I think we are headed in the right way. Greg, I'd like to hear from kind of your thoughts and really kind of maybe building upon what Terry talked about. I'm really interested in what has changed over the years in the terms of how landowners are really looking at enhancing these values that they're holding.
Sure. Yeah, it's when we start talking about some of these values, especially when when we kind of played them up in the context of, ecosystem service markets, I think that there's in itself a little bit of confusion, sometimes a bit of a misnomer of how we use, ecosystem services and what that really means. But when you distill it down, what we're talking about is really the public benefits of these natural resources that are found on these lands, or in this case, on these private lands. And those values, they're really quite diverse. They're more diverse once you get to really analyzing them than what I think most people think, because once we put them under the microscope, we start seeing things such as, these recreational markets, recreational values, financial values, emotional values, spiritual values,
Right.
Ecological values that translate into clean water and clean air, biological values that may allow us to identify the next cure for some disease through some of these plant compounds. Values related to food. It may be food that's a consequence of producing forage for livestock, or it may be food that is directly associated with the wild animals that are harvested on those properties. So I think that to really have a good thorough discussion of how these values have changed, we've got to identify what that broad suite of values even looks like. In my case, we deal more with the recreational side of things. So over time, seeing landowners place more emphasis on outdoor recreation as part of their ownership driver. And if it's pretty predictable, if it's a multi-generation landowner that's been in their family for a long time, generally the recreation that we're talking about is tied to financial, revenue generation. Them trying to figure out how to build that recreational component into their, business portfolio for that property to make it profitable. If it's a new landowner, which there's more and more new landowners every day, it's not necessarily as financial driven. So when we start talking about the recreational aspect of what motivates those landowners, it's for their own recreational benefit at times, and depending on what that principal driver is, often dictates what those recommendations look like when we start initially working with the landowner, trying to sketch out something that makes sense. But again, fundamentally, just recognizing that there are a very broad suite of public benefits of these different natural resources that are found on these private lands.
Yeah, I think the point is you articulated it very well, Greg, and I think these are some of the reasons why when we try to talk about the value of these, the suite of ecosystem services, as you mentioned, it becomes very hard and difficult. Dr. Roel Lopez and I have been working on trying to put a value on these ecosystem services in Texas, and trying to there's been some of these others, and people have heard me talk about this on other podcasts recordings. California put a report out right about a year ago that they did with California Rangeland Trust and Berkeley, and around 300,000 acres of conservation easements. They put a value, or were able to put a dollar figure value on the ecosystem services that those 300,000 acres were providing to the state of California, and it was $1.44 billion annually, which is a tremendous amount of value. And as you mentioned, there's some of those values, it's just, you can't put a dollar figure, right? The spiritual and mental health component is, it's just hard to put something on that. And it's interesting, how we go, and how Terry's talked about, I think the stars are aligning, and, how does this look like in a marketplace, and how do we start putting these values together? Terry, kind of shift from that. What are some of the new and innovative strategies that are, really becoming available, for landowners to really enhance these values on their working lands?
It is, that's a question that I get asked almost daily by somebody. And the answer really is it's tune in tomorrow, because it'll change. And if you don't catch tomorrow, come back day after and it'll be different, because it seems like we're in a point where, we have these basic ecological services that have been kind of growing at a steady pace for the last 20, 30, maybe 40 years in some cases. But it was just a general trend as mitigation markets evolved, water markets evolved, some of these other lesser known services. But suddenly, over the last, call it 24 months, 18 months, it's like everything went into hyperdrive. Some of that is driven by political change. Some of it is driven by social change. The migration of people, you can't discount how much of an impact that's having on Texas markets, because we certainly are in the midst of a human migration where we have people from Northern California, New York, and a host of other West Coast and northern locations that are relocating. Texas, Tennessee, Florida, and those people are bringing.
Yeah, it's 1,400 people a day.
Yeah, it's a massive number, right? So just the viewpoint those people are bringing is creating an evolution. But the Biden's 30 by 30 plan, what's that going to mean? Certainly, again, some of the ones, most of the oxygen's being taken out of the room by carbon now, because it's just the one that's most talked about, and frankly, the one that more people at least may understand or have a basic concept of. But that's taken up a lot of room. But again, things are they're changing so quickly. I'm kind of right out there on the front with everybody else, trying to figure out what's going to come next, and how do we get from, as you mentioned, the carbon's just a minute portion of it. So
right.
How do we get the biodiversity credits? And when does that become a market, when a landowner can get up with an idea that he's going to go develop more dollars for his ranching enterprise off of that? How long does that take? And again, their deals are underway now. So for some people, that'll be next week. For some people, that may be a few years. As Greg said, the recreation market is going in some phenomenal places right now. Again, society driven. Some of that is probably heavily influenced by what our country's experienced with COVID and the newfound desire for people to move outside and get back to the outdoors after being cooped up. But we're in a market like I've certainly never seen, and I don't think Greg has either, on the demands for people to explore and experience the outdoors. So from that standpoint, some of these non-consumptive recreation-based enterprises, I think we're going to see those explode. Greg, you might add a little to that.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right, and I think COVID kind of ties into that. We had been, for many years seeing a bit of an uptick in these what we consider to be non-consumptive, which are typically non-hunting, non-fishing, wildlife-related enterprises. We've been seeing an uptick in those markets, but largely the public lands, whether they be state parks, even city parks, national parks, those kind of areas, have been the venues that have been suitable for satisfying the appetite of those growing markets. But with COVID, COVID really it allowed people time to to, I think, evaluate what is important in their lives and their lifestyles, because they had to sit on their hands for such a long period of time in 2020. And one of the things that we've seen that's come out of that is we had our society that connected or reconnected to our natural world, to our outdoor world, in a very meaningful way. And that's resulted in a spike in hunting and fishing license sales. It's resulted in a spike in visitations of different parks. If you look at all the different retail sales, backpacking, hiking, boating, UTVs, ATVs, bird watching supplies, across the whole spectrum of those outdoor product retail sales, many of them have been at a record level. So, I think COVID has fast forwarded that trend of people wanting to spend time in those settings, and are now, those markets, I think, are now large enough to where it can't all be found on public lands. And so one of the next options is for these private landowners to begin looking at their properties, their lands, as a venue for being able to accommodate those growing markets. So even though some landowners have been monetizing those opportunities in the past, I think that we're just almost in a microwave rapid pace. Within the last year, we have landowners in a position to really be able to take a close look at creating a business model around this market, and hopefully it's a market that has some sustainability to it.
Yeah, I think too, Greg. I mean, the pandemic has been a double-edged sword in some sense. I mean, all the positive things, right? This connection back to nature and the outdoors. But we also, have seen a, tremendous increase in sales, right? And property sales, and so we're seeing I think an increase of fragmentation, right? So we had that increase of population increase, as Terry mentioned. Now this increase of pressure on the land of fragmentation, and, what is that gonna, look like in the future too? So
yeah,
a lot of positives and negatives, but I mean, there's always solutions around those things.
Yeah, and I think one of the neat things, one of the silver linings of that fragmentation effect is, as those properties are fractured, we're creating new landowners, more landowners.
Yep.
In Texas. So we're now in a position to share our legacy of this being a very proud private landowner state with more people, which creates greater relevance for those private lands, and hopefully at the end of the day creates a critical mass within our society that makes better decisions on what goes on those private lands, because now they're part of the stakeholder group that is going to be a consequence of what goes on those lands.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a great point, Greg. And, when we think about our nation was kind of founded, it was one of the key principles on owning land and that private landowner, aspect. And so it's great from that perspective. I think too, it puts some pressure, and I think is a good timing. And some of the other pieces is, we need to strengthen our extension service. We need to strengthen, research. We need the technical assistance, right, to help these landowners help make better decisions. To be able to steward those lands is really a crucial component to that. I think one of the other ones, too, is that, even beyond, folks of means, they still want to be able to try to make money and look at other revenue streams to kind of help that. And I think, Terry, to kind of flip back to you, is, one of those concepts, and it's foreign to some, is this mitigation, right? Has been around a long time. I'd like to really hear from you and explain kind of the mitigation side of the business and those revenue streams.
Sure, and I think when you're talking about mitigation, you're primarily referring to the mitigation world that revolves around wetlands and streams and endangered species, because there's again, in the water markets and a lot of the other broad ones, in the truest sense, those are still a lot of those are still mitigation. But when you think about the most structured markets within that, i.e. the streams and the wetlands, which are the foundation of that is based on the Clean Water Act and the requirements that happen around the country when somebody wants to develop resources that constitute wetlands or streams. And before I dip off into what one of those projects actually looks like, there's a big disconnect in the country of what people can and can't do, and there's a great lack of understanding in the fact that private landowners that are operating agriculture lands, forestry projects, when the Clean Water Act was first put together, there were exemptions put in place. And farmers, ranchers, timberland owners can consider themselves blessed many times that they have the capacity to go out, build roads, build ponds, and do things that industry simply can't do. And so I think there's a little bit of a disconnect on a lot of landowners in their vision about what's this all about. I don't need permits to do that. Why would somebody buy a permit? But again, if you're not working under one of those national exemptions, you're in a different place. But to get back to your question specifically, in order for one of the state highway groups, oil and gas entity, a petrochem plant, a Walmart that wants to develop a property in some way that is going to negatively impact a wetland or a stream, in order for them to move forward and get their permit from the Corps of Engineers to do so, there's got to be an offset. And those really occur in two ways. One, as needed, where a project requires 5 acres is impacted, 5 to 10 acres has to be restored. And often there is a ratio where it's not a 1-to-1. If somebody's impacting 1 acre, they've got to offset something larger than that to account for the temporary loss between the time it's impacted and the time it's restored and those factors. But so some cases we're going out and we're doing what's called a permittee responsible project, where we're offsetting in one project for one impact. The more complex, larger, more robust product is a mitigation bank. And that's an enterprise where someone goes out, locates a piece of property that's importantly has been degraded in some way. We're not looking for perfect properties. We're looking for damaged properties, if you will. Although the term damaged is it's kind of like beauty in the eye of the beholder. It could be something that's been fairly degraded. It could be something that just happened to be converted over from a forested wetland to an ag field many years ago. But in that process, we go out, we go through a permitting process, negotiate with the regulators on how we're going to restore, enhance, or fix, if you will, that property. That negotiation results in a ledger of ecological credits that are released as the project materializes and hopefully succeeds. And then when the potential state highway department, petrochem plant, Walmart come along and they identify an upcoming project, they identify an estimate on the number of acres or linear feet of impact that they're going to encounter as they develop their project, rather than getting, in their view, often in the weeds, if you will, and getting into something that's not their core business. Instead, they can just purchase a credit from one of these approved banks and move on. And back to your concept of how does a private landowner benefit, they can do a landowner joint venture where they partner with a group that's got experience and hopefully a successful track record in developing these types of projects. It may be one of those generational landowners that just would, they're beyond wanting to maintain that asset and they're looking for a way out. So they may sell the property to somebody who's interested in doing these, or in some cases, they may want to be just an absolute entrepreneur capitalist and just do the whole thing internally, which is a bit more of a undertaking, but it's been accomplished many times over the last 20 years by enterprising folks. But in some manner, again, in the species markets, largely follows it in the same type of structure. It's an opportunity for landowners to either improve their property, improve their cash flow, opportunity for somebody who wants land but is trying to figure out how they can justify paying for it to go buy a new piece of property and use mitigation as a means of paying down the debt, paying off the land over time. So there's a variety of ways that landowners participate in the market, but that's the general overview.
Yeah, thanks for that kind of detailed and how that works. And, I mean, no one has more experience than yourself and your crew there at Conservation Equity Partners for sure. We've been talking about, all this episode around these ecosystem services and value in those and trying to think of other ways. Greg, you really, articulated this big suite of ecosystem services. And really, what boils down to is really about this private land stewardship, public benefit, right? It's these goods and services that flow to those public benefits. And if anybody knows you, Greg, well, they know you're a foodie, right? And when we think of wildlife systems, you're providing a recreational opportunity, and it's a value, right, of these ecosystem services, but it's also flows into this protein, right, from a food perspective. And really, really want to hear from your point of view, kind of this other push of foodies and how this all intertwines into the conversation we've had this morning.
Right. Yeah, no, I appreciate the opportunity to discuss that. For many years, there's been these trends within our American society of different groups placing more value on different types of foods. And one of the common areas that we've seen within that foodie group movement is what we sometimes refer to as the locavore movement. Locavore is a term that is generally used to infer that people enjoy locally, and I say, quote, locally, organically produced foods, and they want to be part of the exercise of collecting those foods and processing those foods. And so if you look at our hunting markets, for instance, arguably the fastest growing segment of our hunting market today and over the last few years have been people getting into hunting for food, and which is really, it's counter to what we have seen over the last several decades. But, we talk about how with humanity, things tend to come full circle and repeat themselves. And that's the reason why we hunted to begin with, was to survive, to subsist. And obviously today, people don't have to go out and with gun in hand and become a hunter to subsist. But nonetheless, I think that it's very interesting and for me very refreshing to see people getting into hunting for food reasons. You look at some of the work that Shane Mahoney's doing with his Wild Harvest Initiative. You look at Steve Ranilla's Meat Eater, energy that he's created with the markets that are following him, and it's part of his business circles. Again, I think those are just testimonies that that we have an opportunity here with these demands, these markets, to try to leverage that opportunity for the benefit of cultivating those markets, as well as advocating the importance of the stewardship that it takes to sustain those markets. And I'd be really curious to learn more, and Mahoney's spending some time on this now, but there's reasons to believe that if you look at the sheer biomass of wild game meats, and when I say wild game, I'm not just talking about mammals and birds, I'm talking about the fishes of this country too, freshwater and saltwater fishes. You combine the biomass of those meats that are available on a sustainable basis, and then you look at the different nuts and berries and mushrooms and plants and plant parts that we have available naturally across the landscape. There's perhaps reasons to believe that sustainable surplus, whatever that number is a large enough number that when you add that to our traditional, ag produced foods, that it represents national security for us, because a nation's food security is central to its, just the health and the security of its people. So as we move forward, I'd like to see our leadership in the hunting world take a closer look at that, because if we can now create a new discussion talking about how wild game and hunting speaks to a nation's food security, we now have a new platform to serve as an advocate for the importance of hunters hunting, and then the game meats and the foods that are part of that. So.
Yeah, and I think it becomes a better connection, right, to our land stewards and all of those. And I think it's, just fascinating to me. I could talk about this all day, of just, all of these connections. And as we kind of get closer to wrapping up this conversation, on this episode, what are some of the advice that you have for landowners interested in exploring some of these new strategies we've talked about?
Sure. Yeah. Now, great question. To me, it reminds me of a quote I heard many years ago that says, "The mind is like a parachute. It only works when open." And so I think, initially just being able to maintain a bit of a open frame of mind of approaching some of these land use opportunities, maybe from a different perspective than what historically one may have looked at those opportunities, seeking input from experts and other folks that have been there and done that, and try to learn from their successes, learn from their failures, so you don't repeat the same failures that they may have had. And but I think also very importantly, and I've seen this in my business for years, we talk about life being a give and take matter, and in this case it's more of a take and give. If you're going to take people's money, if you're going to open your gates to these people as an attempt to try to monetize those resources that are on those properties, you have to realize you're going to have to give something back. And sometimes that's underfoot traffic. Sometimes it's dealing with just the things that go along with having folks on your property, and many of them are city folks that may not be as mindful about things that are pet peeves of yours. So I think it's very important that landowners, when they do start opening their gates up and monetizing these opportunities, that it is a take and give proposition, and they need to either accept that on the front end, or they're going to end up at times pulling their hair out. So a little context there.
Yeah, thanks, Greg, for that, for those comments there. I think we're having some technical difficulty with Terry, unfortunately, because I'd really love to hear kind of some of his thoughts on this. But with that, that's technology, right? And we can't live with it. We can't live with it, and we can't live without it. But again, Greg, I really appreciate you and both Terry joining us today and kind of giving some insight and some, kind of planting those seeds for us to kind of start thinking through as this, ecosystem services start kind of coming about and growing in this realm. So I really appreciate that.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Just really want to again, remind listeners to rate and review our podcast. This really, helps us, spread the word about our working lands conservation, and really want you to join us next week as we continue the discussion and dive deeper into these ecosystem service markets. Till then, have a blessed one.
Beyond the Fence Line is brought to you by the Texas Agricultural Land Trust, dedicated to conserving the Texas heritage of agricultural lands, wildlife habitats, and natural resources. Find out more at txaglandtrust.org.